Hi, thank you so much. I am honored to be here. As Eliana mentioned, my name is Amy Andrieux, and I'm the Executive Director and Chief Curator at MoCADA. We're a 22-year-old institution based in Fort Greene, Brooklyn, that uses art as a vehicle for social change. Personally, I am a huge fan of Ben Okri, and I've read all of his books, so it is an honor to be here in your presence and to interview, well, actually just have a conversation today. So thank you, Ben. How are you feeling?
I'm very well. I'm very glad that you changed the phrase from interview to conversation, because that's exactly what I had in mind.
Good.
A conversation. Maybe with some readers. Maybe you could do some readers.
Right, absolutely. I actually have a couple of pages in mind that I might pull from today. So let's start with identity and self-knowledge, if that's okay with you. I remember watching an interview with you, and you said something, you talked about a deeper story that is always embedded in our consciousness somehow that we may not be aware of. And I'm curious, you're a writer, phenomenal one at that, but curious how you identify yourself. How would you define yourself? What is your secret story or your origin story, your higher goals and your dreams beyond just writing? What are you getting at in your story?
Well, Amy, those are really large questions that you're asking, and just simply cannot be answered in this space. They're really big. They're really big questions. I mean, those are the questions that give rise to kind of ginormous autobiographies, like 4-volume autobiographies. But I'll try and simplify. Higher goals, really to transform through the riddling power of storytelling, to ask awkward questions, and to refine the quality of my questions, to unify, to bring together, to get us to look beyond the limitations of our eyes and of our senses and even sometimes our perceptions of our histories, because what we are is not just what's happened to us, it's also how we perceive it. And I'm fascinated by the walls that we use history to erect between us and our possible destiny. And I say this because our destiny is as mysterious to us as is our possibility. And our possibility is as mysterious to us as our freedom. And our freedom is an extraordinarily strange and mysterious thing. It's not just a case of knowing that you have freedom or even seizing your freedom from day to day. I think it's a profound act of constant self redefinition and self-liberation. It's a constant thing. Just when you think that you know what the limits of your freedom are, there's the beginning of a new kind of freedom. A deeper story. I mentioned that thing about deeper story in that essay, in that sort of verbal essay I gave, because when I look at people, I look at histories, I look at cultures. But after so many years of thinking about the greater arc of our histories and of ourselves, I find that there are two stories. There's the obvious superficial story that we think we're telling and we think we're living. And underneath that, sometimes unknowable, and sometimes even very hard to reach. And when you reach it, it's hard to define and put into words. Underneath that, there is a deeper story. And that deeper story transcends in many ways, even history itself. It's if you like, you can say it's a story of our soul's journey through the mystery of space and time. But our own particular angle on it, and with the way in which all of history, all of time has inflected and affected us. And this deeper story is the story that I think is a real guiding story of our lives. It's the real one when we're aware of it. It's just that we tend to live on the more superficial story. And I think that what great storytellers do and what great story readers do, because those two people need one another, is that they tap into that deeper story and then they resonate it and then they magnify time and possibility through it. That's what I'm fascinated by.
Yeah, it reminds me. Go ahead.
Amongst many other things, I was going to say, Amy.
I was going to say, actually, it's the transcending of suffering, as you say in Astonishing the Gods. That's what it sounds like, this meditation on invisibility, but transcending suffering. Yeah.
Yeah, yes, transcending suffering, but also using suffering as the not the place in us, not for revenge, not even for redemption, that too, but something beyond that, which is new vision. Because the quality of our life is only really as great as not only what we've learned from what's happened to us, but how we use that energy to open up the future. Do you get what I'm saying?
I absolutely do. I absolutely do. But I always find it interesting though, because you you have a way of making us feel as we're reading, right? And understanding kind of the questions that you're asking, and forcing us to pose questions of ourselves. But then after we've done with the book, there are more. I've read Astonishing the Gods maybe 3 times, and each time I read it, I get a different story. And even beyond that reading, there's a kind of a rumbling in me, and a kind of a reconfiguration of the world, if you will. So that's why I asked, essentially, or that's why I was kind of alluding to this transcendence of suffering. And like you said, it's going beyond what we know to be true.
But, absolutely. But we also have to add to this, Amy, that that suffering is cultural, sometimes it's racial, but it is also implicit in the human condition.
Absolutely.
The great philosophers say this about existence, that coming into existence is, in a sense, coming into suffering. So our condition of being here is fretted round with edges of known and unknown suffering. So some of us have experienced it more than others because of for historical reasons, but the condition of suffering itself is already implicated in being human. And that's why there are those people who have suffered much less than others, but who still can resonate with that suffering and create great vision. Do you get what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
So it's yeah.
So why do you use whispers as a vehicle to kind of share that thought or that perspective? Whispers tend to seem to be a recurring, what's the word I'm looking for? I don't want to say
phrase, theme.
Yeah, theme.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, is that something? Why do you use whispers?
You're the first person who's picked that out, Amy.
Really?
Well done. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Now I'll stop using it a bit less. Well, I think because there's 2 kinds of listening, just as there's 2 kinds of reading, and just as there's 2 kinds of stories, there's 2 kinds of listening. There's the superficial listening, the listening we do with our ears and sometimes with our body, where something is said, or the world says something, or history says something, and we bleed listen, if you know what I mean. We hear it in a very strong way. But then there's another kind of listening that we very rarely do, or we do, but we don't know that we're doing. And that other kind of listening is the whispers of things, the whispers of the world, the whispers of history, the whispers of time, the whispers of where we are right now. And it's the whispers, the whisperings that is farther reaching. The whisperings have to do with stuff that reaches far into the future and far into the past. They're the things that we really should listen to, because the things whispered will one day become thunder. And that's why I'm fascinated by whispers and by the ways and by whisperings, and listening to that lower, more quieter kind of speaking that things do to us. Those who can hear those whispers today are able to sort of put things into motion that stops the disasters and the terrors and the failures of tomorrow. It's what the very best politicians do. The very, very best politicians, and the not so best poets. Your average poet taps into that. And most human beings. My mother was a great listener to whispers, to the whispers of things. She was always saying to me, Ben, I really think you should be careful about so and so. I'm like, why do you say that? And then 5 years later, bam, there it is. And I'm like, how does she know? She just listened. She listened way ahead of time.
It's always the mothers. It's always the mothers.
Yeah, yeah. It tends to be the mothers. The fathers have a different kind of a vision, but it's yeah.
But you know, what you're talking about is, again, this intuition. This, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but I feel like it's this intuition and this idea of being tethered to source in some way, right? Is that fair to assume? And then we can.
Yes, it's the word tethered that I would question a little bit.
Okay, why? I'm curious now.
Well, because the word tethered implies not something that we have done, but something that either is or someone else has done.
Fair.
We very rarely tether ourselves to things. We bind ourselves to. We connect ourselves with. Tethering is very, there's something quite specific about tethering. Sorry, you forgive me.
No,
I'm very sensitive.
You're fine. You're fine.
Yeah.
The idea of tapping in is a choice, essentially. That's what you're saying, as opposed to.
Oh, absolutely. So it's a choice. Maybe it's even a decision. Sorry, I was reading about the difference between choice and decision today, and I've been thinking about it all day.
Tell, please say more. I want to hear more about this, actually.
No, it's this French philosopher drawing attention to Kierkegaard, who said that choice is really a choice that you make between well, it's a decision you make when you actually acquire more knowledge about stuff, and then you say, I choose to do that. Whereas decision has to do with the unknown and has to do with uncertainty and requires more courage and therefore more freedom. So I was just fascinated by it. I've been thinking about that all day. I like that. A thought hits you and you walk with it all day. So today is choice and decision. Yeah.
But I like that because that's essentially what your books do. You know, essentially, there's always a journey of some sort, and you know, there are so many uncertainties that the protagonist is exploring and trying to make peace with in some way, shape, or form. And time is always a recurring factor in these stories. Are you in love with time and this idea of not being here or there and being everywhere?
Time. If we see time right, time is magic, but timelessness is more magical. Time is. We think of time as this thing, this finite resource, this thing that's running away on our clocks. But time is a force. Time is one of the great. I think time is one of the gods. It's an ancient wisdom that they made in all cultures. They deified time, because time is not just the ticking of the clock. It's actually how we shape destiny, how we transcend. And as for timelessness, what?
It's magic.
Yes, time is. No, I am fascinated by time. I'm fascinated by what you can do with time and what you can undo with time. And time, yeah. You take something like this, for example. This book is Every Leaf of Hallelujah is time and death driven, and two kinds of death driven: the possible death of a mother and the death of a forest. And the forest here in the book is another kind of mother. So. Yes.
Thank you for doing that, because I actually wanted to read a couple of passages from Every Leaf of Hallelujah. On page 35, you say, but we are all connected. All the trees are connected. If one suffers, all suffer. We each feel what all the others are feeling. But how? Is it by magic? You would say so if you couldn't see beneath the surface. That just completely, I'm getting goosebumps right now, actually, reading it again. And then there's a second part that I really loved as well. We started small like most things, said the great tree. And we draw love from the earth and draw love from the sun. We sink our roots deep into life. We support one another. None of us can grow great without the others. We don't compete. We help one another. We grow one day at a time. We have great patience. You'll be surprised at the amazing things you can do with patience. I want us to talk about those two quotes because, again, they touch on each other in this idea of finding unity, finding grounding in our collective journey, I guess. And I'm curious, were those two, or is the book itself, Every Leaf a Hallelujah, a euphemism or an allegory for the African diaspora or humankind in general? Was wondering what your thinking was there.
Well,
or is that another? Is that too much?
that's another. That's too much. Yes, absolutely, absolutely. But as usual with you, Amy, I'm going to try and compress myself and not do a symposium here on Zoom. If I'd written this book when I was in my 30s or in my 20s, it would have been about two or three things. If I'd written it in my 40s, it would have been about 4 things. Right now, it's about maybe 7 things.
Wow.
The ostensible, the more surface story is a 7-year-old child, a 7-year-old girl, going to a forest to find a flower that would help her sick mother become well again. The story behind that is saving the forest. Underneath it, the bit you just read alludes to another story, where you talked about underneath, what's happening underneath, what's happening. You'd be surprised if you actually know what's going on beneath. You wouldn't say what you said. That's another story as well, because I'm fascinated by what goes on underneath us. You know, it goes back to what we were talking about earlier. You know, we think we're living one kind of story, but actually another kind of story is being lived through us. That underground story, the story of what's happening with the roots, the story of what's happening with the invisible, the story of what's happening with the connections and the survivals and things that seem to be dead actually are just kind of like waiting. And things that seem to be alone are actually part of a deep underground community. The way in which things appear to be one thing on the surface and actually underneath is another. That's another story that fascinates me, and that's the global story. That's the story of what we need to think of if we're going to get over this environmental crisis that's hovering over us, because we always look at the above ground. We don't look at the below the ground. And the below the ground, I think, gives the secret of what eventually will have to be our survival, which is that we are deeply connected to all of these things. We're deeply connected to rivers, to birds, to trees, to volcanoes. We're linked to all of these things invisibly. And so in a sense, we can't solve the environmental crisis. We can only make ourselves the vessel by which a great contribution can be made so that it solves itself. You know, we should get over ourselves. We should stop thinking that we are the ones that are going to solve this thing that is way bigger than us. You know, we just have to, I think we have to make ourselves vehicles. We have to make our contribution and get out of the way, and nature will do the rest. We can't solve the problem of the ocean. The ocean is bigger than us, and so is the earth, and so is the sky. So it's reconnecting the underground connection with all of these things and understanding our place, our really humble place in all of this, and as I say, to rediscover some basic humility, because I think it's arrogance that makes us think that our civilization dominates the earth. It is. It's an incredible arrogance, and it's that arrogance that is the heart of the problem.
Is that why you chose to write this as a young adult novel and to tell it through the lens of 7-year-old Ngozi?
Yeah, it's why I chose to tell it through someone who's innocent, and in their innocence is greater than us. You know, because she listens. She's able to do the deep listening. You know, the forest says to her, you know,
even when she doesn't listen, she listens.
Even when she doesn't listen, she listens. Exactly. She listens better for not having listened while she was listening. I can see that you like your double paradoxes.
Oh, absolutely do. You know, the juxtaposition in all your stories, I feel, that's what always drives me deeper into the story, deeper into the narrative. It's the story within the story, and trying to figure out which one is going to kind of win the battle, so to speak, or kind of take precedence in the story later down the road. And it's always a fun journey there. because you can never anticipate what's going to happen next. Again, I'm a fan of your work, so I can talk about this for hours.
Well, thank you. I like what you say. You can never anticipate, because I never pre-anticipate. I don't prepare those non-anticipations, because that would be too calculated. I'm just as surprised by what the narrative is getting me to do. Again, for me, it's about great listening. It's about deep, painful listening.
So you don't know the end of the story when you start writing?
Oh, the pen does.
Okay.
My fingertips do, and my underground story does, but my brain doesn't. I don't like my brain knowing. When my brain knows, it becomes a boring story, because then I calculate everything, and when you're reading it, you can see my calculation. I can see it in the hands of many writers I admire, who plot and calculate. You can already see the calculation, like in films that are overdetermined. You can tell straight away from the beginning who's gonna die. And who's, even if they look like they're the heroes. The thing about calculation is that calculation foreshadows itself. It triggers itself. It already communicates. Genuine surprise has to be the surprise of the writer in the midst of the journey, as much as the surprise of the reader. It has to be.
That's powerful.
It has to be. Because otherwise it's just plotting, the kind of thing that the excellent Trollope was good at, and we got, people got tired of after reading 15 novels of the wonderful, of the great man.
Right.
But with someone like Shakespeare, you have this feeling that although he's a great playwright and a great plotter of stories, but that there's an element of constant surprise in the language, in the terms, in the jams that he gets himself into. I'm thinking of something like Hamlet. Anyway, don't let me go. Don't let me go from one of my pets.
I like the journey, the ins and outs of this conversation. Would you consider your work magical realism or supernatural fiction?
I wouldn't use either of those phrases, actually, because supernatural already implies that there's something outside of nature. So I don't believe that. I think everything is within the natural law, within the natural realm. Everything is. It's just that most of it we don't understand, and the things we don't understand we call supernatural. Now, as for magical realism, it's a very particular kind of school. And while there's magic in my work, my magic inclines more towards the philosophical alchemical magic, the magic of transformation, rather than to the magic of magical realism. Now I can see how someone who hasn't seen a donkey or a horse before can confuse those two things, or anyone who hasn't seen a dog and a fox can confuse those two things. But just because it's got 4 legs doesn't make it one kind of animal. I always say to people, just look really at what I'm doing, and you find there's always a natural. There's always a tremendous inner logic. I tend to use the word dream logic. I never do anything that flies off completely without a grounding and without a natural basis. Very, very rarely. Even when Mangoshi flies in every leaf, she's not flying off the ground. She's actually flying within a world. She's making a journey within the world of trees, and the world of trees is its own global world. So there's a philosophical thesis inside everything that I do. It's grounded in thought. There's never any whimsy. I don't do whimsy. People use the word fantasy for something like the famished road, and I'm like, it's not fantasy. There's a difference between fantasy and imagination. Imagination, you can trace it's like a drawing. It's like an intricate drawing. You can actually trace the links. You can see the lines. You can follow it. With fantasy, there are big leaps, and sometimes between the leaps, there's a certain illogicality. I don't do illogicality, not really.
Was storytelling, I guess, huge in your family? Was it something that was, I grew up in a Haitian family where storytelling is everything. After a meal, there's a story. When you wake up, there's a story. There's a story every moment. So I'm curious how important storytelling was in your family, and was there a griot of sorts that you kind of looked up to, or just were inspired by at all?
No, we have our griots were really local and really domestic. It was largely mom, and you know, when you go to the village, just your fellow, your you know, the elders, and your playmates. You know, mom was a storyteller. She didn't really tell stories as such. She just told stories because we were so stubborn, and the only way she could get through to us was tell us stories. And sometimes, and often, not sometimes, often, in fact, always, the stories were embedded with these prickly bits of wisdom, these prickly bits of thought. But she had this thing whereby she never finished a lot of her stories, at least to me. She'd start the story, and then 3/4 of the way she just cut off, and she'd just go back to what she's doing. And I'd be like, "Mom, you didn't finish." She said, "Didn't I?" And I'd be puzzling over what she meant and why she didn't finish and what she did say. And I'd be puzzling over that for years. And that kind of was a big influence on my technique later on, because I realized that sometimes the semblance of unfinished things with pregnant presences has a way of haunting the mind. Until the mind is properly haunted, we don't really ask questions, you know. Until those hauntings refuse to go away, those questions can't get a deep hook into us, and that actually then release our own creativity, because we shouldn't be told things. We should be discovered. We should discover things through the intensity of the questions that we just refuses to let go of us. And in the village when I was a kid, we'd gather us playmates and challenge one another to tell stories, and see who can make up stories from whatever is suggested, and add your story on top of that without disturbing the story that had gone before. So it forms a kind of a chain. So that too, all of these things were things that I kind of like became aware of and developed and deeply interested in, alongside the great techniques of literature itself.
What about this quest to the unknown, to destinations and places? Because places are always important in your stories as well. There's always this shift into places, this juxtaposition of place and time and whispers, and the development of the character itself. All of these things are happening simultaneously, and I feel like the place is its own character, or the places are characters in your story.
Places.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. No, Amy, please. Sorry, I stopped your wonderful flow.
No worries. No, I was just going to say, I can't help but think about how, for me, you're kind of, as a reader of your books, I feel like I'm thrown into this place of transition. And I'm going along the journey I have to transform. I have to go through this process if I'm going to read the story and get something out of it. And I can't help but think about this moment that we're in, this COVID moment where we're in transition. We're not quite out of it. We're not quite in it. So, and it just seems perfect that, there would be a reissue currently with Astonishing the Gods and this new book. I'm curious, what is the wisdom that you're trying to get us to exactly? Exactly. What is this wisdom that you hope for us to glean now from these places, so to speak?
Well,
I hope you love me to this, by the way.
Well, it's interesting you chose COVID as one of the transition. I think there's a bigger transition than that, and that's climate.
Absolutely.
And there's another transition alongside that too, which is the transition from the Black Lives Matter moment to an almost post-Black Lives Matter moment, because that's definitely what's happening here as well. Mm-hmm. I mean, certainly in England, where in Britain, where a minister said that no senior official of government can support Black Lives Matter visibly. That already for me begins to define a moment of reaction, a moment of profound reaction. So there are many transitions. There are many transition moments going on. Some are deadly and tragic for all of us, for the whole of the human race. And some are more local and more manageable. And some are cultural and have to be fought and will be won. And what is the wisdom of this moment for us? I think we have to become more aware. I think it's awareness. I think we have to become more aware. We have to be aware and active in our awareness. And we have to be brave to face the truth of things. You know, it's very hard. You talk about a journey to the unknown. You know, and I was gonna say to you that maybe someone said there are 7 stories, and you think about it a long time, and you think maybe they were being too generous. Maybe they're just 2 stories. Maybe finally there's just 1 story. You know, and it's the journey to the unknown. Birth, life, death. You know, change, injustice, fighting injustice. Are we going to win? Will it succeed? Fighting the enemies of climate change and the perpetrators of it, including ourselves. Will we face the truth of our place in it? Will we face our culpability? You know, so it is always about awareness, truth, the courage to face the facts, and the facts are always more horrendous and more challenging than we to admit, and also being aware of the truth, and the truth is greater than the facts. The facts may be horrendous, but the truth is greater than the facts, and the truth is the truth of what is underneath, what really makes us as a species great, what makes us human. We allow ourselves to be overwhelmed by the facts, and we're not able to, you know, we feel ourselves overwhelmed because we're not aware of this deep fundamental truth that, you know, we are greater than you know, even what we have unleashed. We unleashed it. You know, if we don't think we're greater than it, then we damn well have to be. It's you know, it's a responsibility that's thrust upon us by us. Nobody did it to us. We did it.
Right.
You know? So it's always a journey to the unknown. How do you deal with the unknown? This is something no one has really, from the time of Homer to yesterday's fiction writer, no one has cracked that one. Because there's smaller unknowns, there are bigger unknowns. There are unknowns to do with death, there are unknowns to do with annihilation, there are unknowns to do with love, you know. Will it last? Will she love me? Will he love me? Do they still? Will they tomorrow? Will they love me when I'm 62 and a half? You know, it's always the unknown. We don't know, but we must go forward. We must go forward in truth and strength and humility.
I have a follow-up to that.
There isn't. You know, finally, all the wisdom in this world is really boilable down to the truth of the soul. Finally, really.
Yeah, absolutely.
But then the soul is, but then the soul is bigger than the universe, practically.
Yeah, and that reminds me of.
You had a follow-up question. Don't forget.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say, or a follow-up thought. It's all related. It reminds me of the concept in Astonishing the Gods, where you're doomed to repeat an experience if you haven't fully experienced it the first time.
That's what we're doing.
Exactly.
That's what we're doing. People ask themselves, why are we having to face this stuff again? Well, you know, why did we have COVID and then we had Omicron? I mean, I'm like, hello, we didn't face COVID when we first had it. We didn't face it. We didn't face the global implication of it, that you can't solve that problem in your nation alone. You have to help solve it globally, otherwise it's going to come back to you. These things are so obvious. It's like astonishing.
That's why I love the fact that we're talking about these 2 books simultaneously, because there are lessons in both of them for us to resurface, to chew on, to act from. They're great jumping off points that I hope that people don't just, you know, read past. I mean, it's kind of difficult to read past, actually. It's so palatable. And that's why I asked before, you know, do you know what you're writing? Do you know what you're intending to write? You know, because it comes across as this is a guru who's, you know, lending insights to us. You know, much like Khalil Gibran is another writer that I love. You know, the work of like Khalil Gibran's The Prophet, for instance, where you're reading and it's kind of like a manual for life. When I read your books, that's kind of what I'm feeling. I'm feeling like I have to be prepared with my notepad because I have to take notes, because there are gems of wisdom in here that will guide me for time. Seriously. I'm
yeah,
serious.
no, I don't know. I seriously don't think like that when I'm about to write. I think that's the most crippling. That's the most crippling set of thoughts for a writer to have in their heads when they're sitting down to tell a story. No. I am very moved, and I love it that you're feeling this and that you have this relationship with the work. I love that. But I'm just telling you from my side that I cannot have thoughts like that when I sit down to write. I have to start with emptiness.
Yeah.
I have to start with unknowing. I have to start with fear and trepidation, uncertainty. I pace. I go for long walks. I have this gem of an idea, and sometimes with Every Leaf a Hallelujah, I had the idea for 3 weeks. I didn't know how to start. I go for long walks. I'll fret. And then at some point I just go into a certain stillness, and that's what I'm trying to get to. I go through all this fretting. It's like I have to go through this fretting. It's ridiculous. Then I get to this stillness, and I think maybe I've finally earned it, because if I started with that stillness, everything would be too easy, and maybe what I discover might be too shallow. Maybe the roots of the fret, maybe the fretting is part of the roots of what gets pulled out of me. I'm not sure. And these are thoughts I'm just sharing with you at this moment. I've not prepared any of these thoughts.
Nice.
And I reach this point of stillness, and I hear something, and I can start. And then that's the worst moment. I start, and each day it's, will I continue?
Yeah.
Do I know? Do I? And each day is a tremendous act of faith, a tremendous act of humility, and a slight amount of terror. And each day is like that till it's finished. And when it's finished, I don't look at it, because I don't know what I have. No, because I don't know what I've done, and I don't want to know what I've done just yet. These things, they sometimes I deliberately set out to write something. I sometimes would deliberately plan to write a short story because I want to say something, but half the time those stories don't work, and they only work when I throw out that deliberateness at some point. When I says, "Okay, I thought I was a boss here. I apologize. I'm not."
Toni Morrison speaks about that, or Toni Morrison spoke about that. Actually, saying that
I prefer the speaks. I prefer the speaks. Let her go on living.
Yes. Okay. Toni Morrison speaks to that specifically, saying you have to wait for the story to come to you. You can't rush it. You have to be patient. And there's no such thing as a creative block. That there are pauses as the story is coming to you. Would you agree? You agree with that, I guess.
Yeah, I agree with that. No such thing as a creative block. I just think there's just a wrong orientation that you have with yourself and the material. The block comes when you set yourself up in some way. When you haven't set yourself up, why would there be a block? The block only comes when you've set yourself up to be some kind of this or that. But if you haven't, and you're always in a state of unknowing, always in a state of of trust and of emptiness. Well, even if a block wanted to block you, you wouldn't know where to start. You have to have set up an ego in some way, and then a block can say, "Great, I know where to stop you." I'm just giving a character to the block. Everything has a character.
Absolutely.
As far as I'm concerned.
I just want to mention to those who are watching, please feel free to leave questions in the chat. Any questions, obviously, and I'll pull them into the conversation. But I do want to ask another question.
Hold that thought. I want to answer the first part of the Toni quote. About stories coming to you. I feel she's absolutely right about you have to wait for the stories to come to you, but sometimes you have to go towards it.
Ooh, okay.
Sometimes I know of some stories I wasn't ready to write them yet, and I made several attempts, and it didn't catch fire. It didn't live. But those several attempts were journeys I was already making towards it. I was already saying to the idea, to the story, I'm in love with you. I'm coming towards you. I'm gonna take some couple of risks and come towards you. I may fall on my face. It doesn't matter. This is part of my love for you, and that, I think that too starts those roots that we talk about and start them growing.
Yeah.
So I think it's two things. I think to let it come to you, we have to go to it a little bit. Otherwise, why is it drawn?
Right.
Why is there a magnetism?
I also find that fascinating because it's almost like you're taking us through that process as the reader. It's almost like your characters are mirroring this kind of journey, this inner journey that you're going through. You know, this unknown, this unraveling of the onion, you know, this going to some place that I have no idea where we're going, but the ending will not only surprise us, it would make us better for it. But I have another question. I wanted to make that statement, but I have another question. You made a statement. I can't remember if it was your TED talk or what, but you said we should not accept the definition of achievement for ourselves because you believe it keeps us, because it keeps us in a perpetual state of performance. And I wanted to hear you speak to that a little bit and why you believe that. Remember?
Yes, I do. I think I used different words. And when I thought of mine as paraphrased, I have to reconfigure myself inside the paraphrase. Yeah, I think the definition. Our defining our achievements or achievement is a dangerous thing because it limits ourselves in relation to what we have done is dead as far as one is concerned. It may be living as far as itself is concerned. And to think of yourself in relation to what you have done, I think is I'm going to borrow your phrase, your word, to tether yourself. to tether yourself to that which is no longer vital. I believe we should always start again. I believe we should always start afresh. It's very difficult, yeah, because our society heaps perception on us, perceptions of ourselves in the form of prizes, awards, etc., 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 and we internalize, and it becomes part of our personality, part of our performance. And I just think it's deadly. I think it's deadly for an artist. I think it's deadly for a human being. It takes away our simplicity. It takes away our vulnerability. It takes away the very things that we need to be free. It's about freedom here, finally.
Yeah. Don't remind me about a way of being free, because I can start asking questions about that. I will go in, which is another one of my books. Literally, I'm going to take a picture and somehow send it to you of all the books that are on my shelf of yours. Like, wow. Seriously, Hamish Road, etc. So it's refreshing to hear that you're always coming from a place of newness as you begin to write. You're always coming from a place of openness. And I think there's a lesson in that for all of us. I really do. I really do.
Well, I hope so.
I'm like,
I hope so. You have to understand that other, people have all sorts of people have different ways of performing their lives, of living their creativity. I know people who are very meticulous planners, really meticulous planners, and after they've done their planning and done the execution of their planning, they're actually also meticulous in getting rid of the evidence of the planning. Do you get what I'm saying? I know people who can't take a step without calculation. And when you watch them walk, you wouldn't see the calculation, but they've done a tremendous amount of calculation before. That's what works for them. That's what works for them. If you ask them to be open, they won't be able to do anything. They won't be able to start. So again, it depends on your personality, it depends on your history, it depends on your deeper story. But for me, openness and simplicity, uncertainty, I find invaluable. Absolutely. And I forget everything that I've done.
Everything.
I have
You
to
don't take
forget
notes
everything.
either? You don't have a notepad where you're taking notes?
No, when
For
I mean I
yourself?
forget everything, I forget what I've written. I forget what I've done. I I
Got
I
it.
I don't have a backpack of my achievements.
Right. That's I find that really, really, really fascinating. I would think that, after having accomplished so much that, do you take a moment to pat yourself on the back or celebrate? Um,
Well, first of all, my arms are not long enough to get to my back, and
right.
and secondly, I don't think it helps. I don't think it helps the next thing you have to do. I don't think it helps. The hardest thing is to shake off who you were in order to become in order to be who you can become. It's constant. It's a real constant. I'm sorry to
Transformation is
say
constant.
this.
No,
Yeah, it's
that's
constant.
yeah, no, that's a real statement. Keep going. Like transformation has to be. It has to be
Yeah,
in
it's not.
motion.
Yeah, you can't do it once and you've done it for all time. That would make life too easy. That's I think that's the one problem with the relationship that we have with myths. We treat myths too literally, and we tend to think of the one defining moment that changes everything, because you have that in myths. The one moment of Achilles. Achilles is the fight with
The arrow.
with Hector.
Yeah.
We think of the one defining moment that turned the Trojan War. We think of the one defining mythic moment, and life is not like that. Even when you've done the great one defining moment, you still have to go on living the next day. You still have to deal with the opposition to your defining moment. You still have to deal with the forces that you have unleashed in actually putting this thing out into the world. There's nothing we put out there that does not create something that comes back from it, good or bad. You may put good stuff out there and bad stuff comes back from it, because they're the forces, the complex forces of the world. That's the way it is. We can't be simplistic in our perception of the dance of forces in this world.
I like that you called it a dance, because it really is that. And I'm curious now, what are you planning next? This is the journalist in me that's like, what are you doing next? Do you have that in mind? Are you ready? Like, what's happening?
Well, there's going to be an interesting announcement soon. I'm not gonna preempt it. It's another medium in which it's another medium in which I'm working in. But there'll be an interesting announcement. It's going to be quite local. You won't be able to get there unless you go there physically. You can't order it. But there you go.
Okay,
some things you have to make journeys towards.
Yes, I love that. I was going to ask if it was a film, but then you said we have to journey towards it. So now I'm confused.
Yeah, absolutely.
Huh.
Yeah, leave that one to keep teasing.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate this wonderful, wonderful conversation. I mean, I could talk to you for hours.
It's been wonderful. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and if you are watching, please get the 2 books, Every Leaf a Hallelujah, this one, and Astonishing the Gods, which I do not have in front of me at this moment, which is a reissue. There you go.
I do.
There we go.
And also the viewer, if you see this on the shelves, it is not the title is not a misprint. It is not a wrong language. It is exactly what it's meant to be.
Okay, you got to say why. You can't just leave us with that.
Well, because the title is in reverse, and
yes.
that's what the publishers have done with my absolute sublime blessing, because this book is in reverse into reverse to many of the thoughts, many of the ways in which we think today. Reversing the whole idea of visibility as king, when in fact it's not. It's not king at all. It's a good chief, but it's not king.
Okay, I think we got to leave on that note. We can't speak. I was like, just thank you so much.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Amy.
Note, thank you so much, Amy, and thank you so much, Ben. This has been such a wonderful conversation. So much to think about. And as Amy mentioned, go buy these two amazing books from the Center for Fiction. Thank you all for being here in this lunchtime or evening, depending where you're from. And have a great rest of your day.